back to Part 6, Chapter 6 of the online version of Journalism 101, the critical analysis of the mass media. I'm your Professor Paul Trout. We're finishing up our little discussion here about information. And in the earlier part of the video, first part, we talked about storage media, we talked about trends in storage, we talked about usability and user interfaces. In part 2, we're going to talk a little bit about interactivity. Interactivity can be discussed along a number of dimensions. And one of those dimensions is that we can see with evolving media technologies that audiences are no longer passive. And of course, there are some conditions to this, but what is meant by this first is that compared to those Benedictine monks on the Danube who used to sit in these large rooms and spend hours and years translating texts, reading texts, they were essentially, well, they were certainly active in terms of using their minds and reading material on pages. They were essentially recipients of the information that had been handed down to them. Somewhat similarly, and a little bit further along the continuum in terms of interactivity, when I was your age and we would listen to music, often we would hop around, lift up the tone arm and play the favorite songs on an album, or we would create mixed down music onto tapes. And so there was some interactivity and increasing flexibility in terms of what we could do with things like recorded media, recorded sound. Increasingly, however, I think we all understand that just with the little devices that you hold in your hand, that you are a full participant and an active participant, and there's a fair degree of flexibility in terms of what you access, when you access, and that's the big issue in terms of time shifting. You're no longer glued to television screens, for example, because you have to watch television at that time. My generation certainly grew up, when I was an adult, we certainly grew up with things like videotape technology, but we were still essentially required to make sure that we scheduled our VCR to record at a certain time, and then we played back at a certain time. And you have that flexibility, of course, and then some with things like DVR technologies. So we know that on an evolutionary scale, audiences are no longer passive. Now, I say that with certain conditions in mind, based on the concerns I expressed in the first video. Yes, we are increasingly interactive. We can time shift. We can watch programming at a later time. We can recreate and bend and manipulate sound and do our own mix downs in terms of music and that type of thing. But remember, there's not complete latitude in terms of how we do this, and we still have to use the physical and the software architectures of the devices that are designed by somebody else. Okay? There's this illusion, I think, of flexibility and active audience, but there are still conditions attached to it. And that ties in directly with the second component of interactivity that you'll read about in this chapter, and that's this idea that users shape the form and presentation of information. Yes, much more so than in the past, but still with certain limitations. Users select combinations of media. This is also true. We talked a little bit in the first video about how you have the opportunity to simultaneously or continue at the same time have text open, have music open, have visuals open, have still photos open, have moving video or streaming video open. So you have more flexibility than any previous generation in terms of your capacity to select combinations of media and decide how you want to present that information or consume that information or package that information and send it along to others. And of course, in terms of interactivity, with digitization, with miniaturization, with compression of digital files, we are able to store more and more stuff on our hard drives, on our DVRs, on our iPads, on our iPhones, on our iPlayers. So we can access information. We can access a lot of information. We can also download and store a lot more information than ever before. And that's one part of the industry that's growing, of course. That's one part of the technology that's always expanding. And we can use that or repackage that information at a later time. So we've really, with broad strokes, talked about information in this chapter. Changes in the way information is stored, changes in the way information is accessed, changes in its durability with some conditions, increases with certain limitations in flexibility. And I'm always thinking about younger generations, and these chapters are useful because those of you who are enterprising out there are going to be thinking about, okay, with these characteristics of technology, and given my passion for something I love to do, for example, the fashion industry, or music, or art, or news, how is it that these evolving technologies are going to transform the industries that I would like to work in, or that I'm currently working in? And it's the forward-thinking individuals who will find ways to work with programmers, software developers, technical designers, and come up with the next generation of ways that will access, store, reconfigure, remanipulate, and distribute information. And, of course, make money doing it. That's the end of Chapter 6. Next chapter, we're going to start talking about networks, both traditional and evolving, in ways, if you will, the physical, the digital pathways for how all this information has come down the pike, and increasingly how we respond through two-way interactivity to and within these networks. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.